Okay, I wanted to give you a little review. And of course, ideally, we'd be in the classroom talking about this where we could have a back and forth and you could ask questions and comments and everything. And then the next ideal would have been in my Adobe Connect room on one of the nights. I just did not, put this together quick enough because the test is due Monday and it's Friday. So anyways, I thought this was the next best thing. And so I hope this helps. This is very much from my outlines, so don't feel like you have to take notes because you will be able to look at this in my outlines. Sometimes in these reviews, I give more of the bigger picture with some things, and some of that bigger picture is not on the exam, but I think it helps to kind of see how things fit together. So anyways, let's review lesson 07 and lesson 08. And I kind of want to first do this by talking about really essentially why we have this class and what we've been talking about from the beginning. Really the purpose of life is to use our moral agency. And that's to do it for a couple of reasons. One is to see if we choose God. So we're here to make decisions, to see what kind of decisions we're going to make. Will we choose His way or another way? Also, too, we want to make choices that reach our potential here on earth. For those of the lucky ones who get to have a good long life, hopefully we try to figure out how to best become what the Lord wants us to be. And then just a kind of a refresher, agency really is to act and be acted upon. It's not passive. So you live by the consequences of your actions. That's part of agency. So really, life questions, we are always in search of answering what system, rules, guidelines can allow us the most access or freedom possible to use our agency without throwing all of us into chaos, greed, and or corruption. So we're essentially talking here, of course, about balance. So in this course, we've talked about, okay, there's a government system. So we have two things. We've been talking about the government system, and then there's this economic system. The government system is the republic. We have found so far that we know of the type of governmental system that can give us the perfect balance between chaos, anarchy, and tyranny, which is total oppression in a different way of too much order, is republic. And then, of course, now we've been talking about an economic system, which is the market system, which is also a balance between owning all property. And when you own all property whatsoever, that usually means there's no rules or regulations and there can be chaos and greed and corruption. And then there's the other side of owning no property. So we have to remember that man can only thrive in an environment of freedom where he can act and be held accountable for his actions. That's what we kind of learned in lesson 06. So we're free to make choices, government, and we are free to reap what you sow, which is the essence of property. And so you see how economic system and a government system go hand in hand. You just can't have the perfect government system and not an economic system either. You need both in order to have the most access to agency. So really, as we go and we talk about this, protection from the corrupting influence of power comes in politics and, of course, economics. Politics, we've got the republic form of government. And here we have public virtue plus those auxiliary precautions, what helps public virtue stay intact. And then for our economic system, what we learned with the market economy is we need economic virtue. And then also that follows the law of supply and demand. So that's kind of essential with our economic system. So really, when the virtue in both of these cases fails, what happens and what we see constantly today, the people look to the government for help. That's not necessarily bad. But then what happens? When we look too much to the government for help, there's government involvement. As a necessary consequence for bad or good, that involvement entails a decrease in our freedom, which means a decrease in our access to be able to use more of our agency. So here are kind of the reasons why the free market is preferred. And of course, we're also talking about, a church standpoint as well. So here we have our moral agency. This is kind of the best way that I can see how it relates. We've got our economic system. Economic system here at the bottom over here, the free market. So we have the free market, and then we have socialism and communism. I put them in this order because of how it deals with property. So we have property rights over here, less property rights, more. Of course, with the free market, we see that we have the most property rights. And then socialism is a little less and communism a little less. So what you also see here is this correlation. Our liberty and agency are correlated with our property rights. So again, we have man can only thrive in an environment where he can act and be held accountable for his actions. So when I own property, when I have property, when I own money or I earn money, then I am held accountable with what I do with that money, how I spend it. Will I spend it all on myself, worldly possessions, to help others? What? Those are all choices where I can choose God or choose something else, and where I can also, those choices can help me become a better person as well. So this type of freedom allows man to develop divine attributes. Also, too, this is the only current economic system that allows people to own their own property. So that's kind of key, current. That doesn't mean it's the best. It means it's the only current system that we have here that allows man to own property. And for that reason, that's why it's preferred. So here's kind of a brief overview. Lesson 07 and Lesson 08, which really talked about the inherent weaknesses of the market system. And there's 4. So here's the first 2 that we learned. Unequal distribution of wealth. These are inherent weaknesses. This is kind of what comes from the market system, the bad points. We have greed and corruption. We're also then learning production instability and price instability. So we see that, I skipped that part, sorry. And price instability. And we see that the first 2 we learned in Lesson 07, and the next 2 we learned in Lesson 08. So for Lesson 07, the solutions of what it talks about, government intervention. So the solutions for these weaknesses, business regulations. One example is the Affordable Care Act, or also known as Obamacare. That is one way to distribute wealth around, ironically. But it is. And then also, too, Lesson 08, the solution. The solution, really what, could be is the law of supply and demand should be the solution. But critics' solution is government intervention. So what happens is that we raise interest rates on other things like our home, or they sometimes lower interest rates, which is what happened, and a lot of people refinancing their homes left and right. And of course, we also have the New Deal. So let's look at some of this. We'll first start with the unequal distribution, the inherent weakness of the market system. And so here we have the solution. The solution is economic justice from government intervention. So what really does this mean? There's 2 types. Okay, so we have equal opportunity, two theories. Equal opportunity. This is part of a solution for economic justice. When opportunities are equal, all people have an equal opportunity to participate in the market. The success is not guaranteed. And government intervenes to provide equal access. So some examples are free public education, no discrimination. Sometimes they have that with work in the workforce. You're not allowed to discriminate according to age, gender, those things. And the next one, equal conditions. So here are the results. It tries to make things equal. It's a redistribution of property or income. Government intervenes a lot in the marketplace, a progressive taxation, and it's where you really tax the rich more than the poor. So sometimes it's not about, is this the most effective? It's more about what people believe is the most just. So taxing the rich more than the poor doesn't necessarily, that people don't necessarily argue that they think this will actually give us more money. They want to make it equal. And an example of that is the Affordable Care Act. That's one of them. And if I may, one of the reasons why it's part of the equal conditions is that you've got people who, men, actually a lot of men, older men, who have to pay for maternity insurance. Well, men don't have to worry about maternity insurance, but that is a way to kind of equal things out and to help pay for those things. So this solution, the equal condition, what we see is the idea to make conditions equal is not bad, but we see a consequence that comes that can be very bad and corrupting, and that is the spirit of entitlement. So for equal conditions, which it should be synonymous in your mind with going down the road of the spirit of entitlement, let's look at this poisonous cycle and a little bit of the warning signs. And this is where I ask you to really be honest with yourself. As I read this, I had to be honest with myself and really look inward to see if I do any of these things. So, poisonous cycle, feel shortchanged. I ask you to be honest with yourself. Do you feel shortchanged in my class with grades, or in any of your classes with grades? So once you feel shortchanged all of a sudden without realizing it, I don't think any one of you feel entitled. But what we don't understand is it's kind of a necessary consequence of some of these things that we just don't realize. So what happens is spirit of entitlement comes in, then leads to anger. We might not know it. I'm so mad. I'm so irritated. This is so unjust. This is not right. What's being happened to me? And then without knowing it, you fight against God. I can't believe this is happening to me, which is suggesting that God did something, even though you would never think that. No, I'm not fighting against God. These things happen slowly, and they happen under the guise of different ideas. So you do not realize it. This is where trying to be honest with ourselves helps. So what are some of the warning signs? Is the word deserve used frequently in your vocabulary? I had to really analyze this. And this word became a buzzword for me. And I try very hard never to use this when dealing with myself. Other people, it's different. I can say, you deserve better, you deserve this. But when it comes to me, it is my goal not to use that, because I think that could lead to other things. Everyone's different, though. Are you overly critical of others? I had to really think about that one too. And go, I need to watch this. I need to make sure I give people more the benefit of the doubt. Do you ever seek special treatment for yourself? We've got a lot of students in this class who things have come up and they have not emailed me and told me any of it. I've emailed them saying, hey, is everything okay? And then they explain things to me. And then I go, you know what? I want to help you out. I want to do this for you. They did not seek that special treatment, but I wanted to give it to them because they didn't feel entitled to it. And that's something I admire. I really do. So what's the solution here? Here we have what it talks about is really gratitude. That's something I put in with Elder Bednar's video, where he talks about gratitude. There's no way for those things to coexist. You cannot be grateful and feel entitled. So the more we feel shortchanged, what we need to do is look around our life and go, you know what? I'm grateful for my kids. I'm grateful for going to school or whatever. And that starts you on a different path to change your mind frame. Okay, so now we come back to this board. All right, so we're done. Unequal distribution, we're done. Now we're on to greed and corruption. So a declining economic virtue, which is greed and corruption, that is an inherent weakness of the marketplace. The marketplace is not perfect. When greed and corruption come in, that's a sign to other people who says, see, this is bad, we shouldn't have it. That's why I also kind of gave that video in my notes from Milton Friedman, who talked about greed in other systems as well. And the way he put it so simply, I really liked. I thought he did an excellent job. But anyways, here's the solution. Economic virtue keeps self-interest in check. So what does this mean? Economic virtue, this is the Protestant ethic. This is what we kind of inherited from our Protestant, ancestors. We inherited, this is what they came over: hard work, thrift, integrity, self-reliance, and modesty. So we really owe them a lot that inherently comes with some of this. Okay, so this goes consequences of declining economic virtue. It increases our self-interest. Okay, so this is how we can tell if our economic virtue is declining, is if we have more self-interest in what we want and what we need to get. Greedy marketplace, an increase in exploitation, and also look to government to control self-interest. What we're really saying is, hey, government, can you step in and control me? Help control me because I can't control myself. That's essentially what we're saying as a society. So then what happens, of course, and some of it is not always bad, we definitely need regulations. But what does happen is they step in and do more, so our freedoms, we do have less. So because government will now define and regulate what is economic virtue, do we really think government knows what is economic virtue? So that's where we have to kind of be a little bit wary and a little bit careful and try to find that balance between regulations and too many. So the events that led to this progressive era, because that's really what happened. We saw a lot of this terrible declining economic virtue, and it led to this era. So we only have ourselves to blame. At least that's how I view it. So here we have economic freedom from the U.S. Constitution. We really we were the most free out of any nation on the earth. And to be honest, even today, we know more freedoms, as President Benson said, more freedoms than more than 99% of the population who has ever lived on the earth. So really, we could only go down right from here. We really had the most freedom from our Constitution, economic freedom. So what happened? It gave us incentive. All of a sudden, we saw this boom. We saw this boom in creativity and incentive to work. The assembly line, that was one of the biggest creations, where the assembly line started because of Ford with the car, and that just created, as you know, the Industrial Revolution. So with the Industrial Revolution, self-interest increased. No doubt it would, and it did. So people got a little greedy. Not just a lot, not a little, they got a lot greedy. As you read with some of these things, terrible working conditions and pay for people, for workers. So as a result of increased self-interest, which also is you can't have increased self-interest and not be greedy. So then your economic virtue declines. And then what happened is we saw that there was exploitation of workers and resources. Here we have kids that was before the child labor laws. And as a result of that, in ushered the progressive era. So people looked to government to fix the self-interest. They said, hey, President Roosevelt, FDR, please help us. These conditions are terrible, and we need somebody to help. So let's look at the effects of the progressive era. It shifted from classical liberalism to modern liberalism. I thought this was fascinating in the readings the most, because when we think of liberalism, we would never assume, I never assumed I would be classically liberal. I thought that was so fascinating. So let's look at this with the effects of it. So the cause, classical liberalism. It was limited government that allows people to be as free as possible. And that is the essence of being liberal. That's fascinating, because at the time that was radical, right? And it was negative freedom. That's what it was seen as. The effect, it allowed those with power in society the freedom to abuse a majority of people economically and politically. That is the downfall of some of the limited government. The powerful, the greedy, the rich do have that opportunity, even though you still can see that today, but you really see that in limited government. All right, so modern liberalism, that was positive freedom, can only be conferred by an activist, an interventionist, vigilant government that rescued and protected the people from economic failures, abuse, exploitation, and discrimination. And honestly, people really did have good hearts. They are not trying to control others. They're trying to figure out the best society. How can we give the best society? And this is honestly what they felt like was the best path to the best society and the best for all. And so what did this lead? The effect was 17th Amendment, U.S. senators. I'll say this again. If we could redo anything in history, 17th Amendment would change everything. Forget about everything else. 17th Amendment. That's where you change the way you voted for your U.S. senators. Now the states have no interest in this, which is unfortunate. 19th Amendment, women vote, and that was also great. And then the 16th Amendment, income tax, are like, oh, we now need to tax. Child labor laws. 18th Amendment, this is the progressive era. No more drinking. They took that away. So it really was less economic and personal freedom, even if you agree. Even if you agree with these and you think they're good, the consequence is less economic and personal freedom. That doesn't mean that that's bad either. Sometimes we need a little less, right? So anyways, that's kind of the cause and effect of the progressive era. So now we're back here and we're done with that, and we're now moving on to production instability. So production instability, again, the third inherent weakness, this is the order that we're talking about them in, but the inherent weakness of the market system, the production instability gives us a recession. So it's when less products are able to be produced, or too much as well. This gives us the recession. So we're talking about products. So it's when you produce a lot of goods. And the production the demand is very low. And this is for an extended period of time, not just a small period of time. Then what you get is a production decrease. You actually really saw this during World War I with grain. They started producing lots of grain because they did an embargo on Germany. They were trying to cut off Germany's supply. And so they did a blockade for them to try to starve them out. But also, too, we weren't able to do trade. So lots of grain and wheat were needed. So you actually saw throughout the Midwest a whole bunch of farming going on. And businesses really came in, and businesses paid farmers. They brought in farmers, paid them to all of a sudden produce this grain and wheat. So what then started to happen? We produced a lot. The war ended. And then they had so much grain and not everybody needed it. And then the demand was very low. And that's what started. That was the beginning of the Depression. Or it was kind of still in a little bit of the Great Depression because it lasted so long. So then all of a sudden farmers had to leave the business because the production decreased. And then we see with the production decreasing, you have to lay off employees. You don't need employees to make the products anymore because people aren't buying them. And then what happens is that you spend less in the marketplace. People don't have the money now. They don't have jobs. So they don't have money. So they're not spending money in the marketplace. And then you have a recession. Now the key to this is, again, extended period of time. Doesn't really say how much extended. I would venture to say, because this is just a brief overview. I'm sure I could quickly find out. I want to say it's like a year or so, but it's got to be an extended period of time for this to happen. So the production instability, which equals a recession, this is what triggers fiscal policy, where the government steps in, okay? And the causes of production instability or the recession, just to kind of go over this, are business managers' day-to-day decisions. Sometimes they're bad decisions by managers. They're not bright people making these decisions and then saying, oops. So sometimes that's just, bad ideas. And also, too, it's consumer actions. Consumers saying, I'm tired of that product. I don't want it anymore. But that's, again, over a lot of products over a period of time that affects the economy. I guess it's to say, this, for an example, let's just say, this is crazy talk, that on the majority of amount of people don't want computers anymore. I know it's crazy talk, but let's just say they're tired of computers. No, I'm sick of computers. I'm going to go back to writing on paper and watching TV. I'm done with computers. That would cause a recession, because you have so many companies that are thriving off of that industry, and that would lay off a ton of workers. And it's not bad decisions on their part. It's the consumers that now have decided collectively, for whatever reason, we don't want to deal with that. We don't want that. So that's how that could be very problematic. Okay, also too, wages. The wages are not at pace of production of goods and services. And we see that. We see that now with some trying to increase the wages, part-time and full-time as well. National or world crisis. Okay, we see this with a war or a disaster. We see how that causes production instability as well. Economic disruptions in the world markets. So we've also been dealing with that. And inappropriate actions by government, whether it is no action when needed or too much action. So for example, let's just say the government, going back to my computer example, let's say the government said, and pass a law, we now no longer will want people to use computers to do things. And so they all of a sudden take away that idea. That's a way for the government to assert themselves into the marketplace. And this happens all the time. This happens with energy. They say, okay, we have an interest in solar energy, so we're going to give money. We're going to try to flood the market with that. But consumers are like, it's too expensive. I don't want to buy it. So that's why we have a problem sometimes with energy, because the consumers don't want to buy what they're selling, basically. So that's kind of that idea with production instability. So there are two types of short-term solutions for this fiscal policy. One is to reduce taxes, which of course lots of people want. That has problems in and of itself. But to reduce taxes, when you reduce taxes, as you know, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, you've got more money in your pocket. When you've got more money in your pocket, you can spend it in the marketplace, which supposedly will help. And again, short term. We're looking at short term. Raise government spending, which we see happening whether it's a recession or not. But when you raise government spending, some people would say reducing taxes raises government spending. I find that a funny argument, simply because you're actually giving, it's not like the government earned the money that they took from me. They're giving me my money back, but whatever, it's okay. Potato, potato. But anyway, so you raise government spending, and that we've seen that happen. Whereas the $700 billion stimulus that President Obama signed in 2009, the whole point of that was to give money to projects, as they called it, shovel-ready projects all around the country. So they could try to help stimulate the economy, give people jobs. Again, that's short-term solution. But you never know, that has helped in the past. Okay, so now we're done with that, with the product instability. The last one we have to talk about is price instability. So here, this is kind of what I want to show you. So price instability, as you know, deals with inflation and deflation. And this deals with monetary policy. So product instability, as you know, is fiscal policy. And price instability is monetary policy. So I want to kind of go through these. Definition. What is the definition? The value of money goes down because the dollar buys less. My dollar can't go as far, especially in certain other countries as well. $1 won't. Now, I love Lunchables. Okay, I know it's strange and bizarre. Turkey and ham Lunchables, love them. Cheddar cheese. They used to be, before the recession, they used to be like 75 cents. Now they're $1. It fluctuates, but right now I'll just say, because I was just at the store, $1.25. So my dollar doesn't go as far. That is inflation. Okay, this occurs during wars because of full employment, increased wages, and limited amount of consumer goods. So that's why inflation can occur during this time as well. So there are some good parts about wars because of full employment and stuff, and we do get increased wages, but then there's the downside. So who are the winners with price instability? The debtors. The debtors are the winners, those who borrow money. Because we see that, interest rates drops and their money can go further. So those who own real estate and government, which is kind of the biggest borrower, those are the winners. The losers are creditors, the banks. They're not going to really get their money back. The savers, people who save. Again, this is just in times of inflation, so don't kid yourselves in thinking I should spend my money. But really, it's the savers and the money holders, because as inflation goes up, your money buys less. So technically, the idea is you actually have less money. If you own $1,000 in the bank, let's just say, and we're in a time of inflation, whereas before that $1,000 could go and pay for a lot, now it can't. It doesn't pay for as much. So long-term inflation increases in overall money supply, is above overall production of goods. And it's more money than stuff. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the Fed. Monetary policy, as you know, deals with the Fed. And long-term inflation, which is what we're dealing with. It's because the Fed, as they say, they're pumping the market with money. So they're flooding the market. They're printing more money. Then we have stuff. Then we have products. What's fascinating is this happened in Germany and back in World War II. And what was, I should, you know what? Wait right here and I'm going to get a picture. Okay. So here are some fascinating pictures for you. Here's the problem with inflation. And that's what we kind of saw in you did kind of see it in World War II, but it also really happened in World War I. And this was an awful time because they were, of course, printing money. You see these kids here. They had more stuff, more money than stuff. And here we have these kids. This is German money. This is paper money. They're building with paper money. They didn't have much to play with. They couldn't go buy normal bread with it, basically because there wasn't a whole lot of stuff. And it was really sad. So they had all this money. Here's this guy who kind of just is taking this money to this guy who's cashing in his paycheck. So his wage is that he earned went up. However, and here's the banker taking, and this was infamous, where people were using barrels to cart around their paper money that meant nothing. They couldn't spend it on anything. And so this was the really sad part about inflation that you see was the cause of printing more money and you did not have stuff to buy it with. For example, here again, money was just in the streets, sweeping it. It didn't matter. It actually was worth nothing. And so that's kind of the sad part here with if you increase the money supply too much, This is what can happen. And that actually is known as hyperinflation. And of course, it's rare. Again, we only saw it occur once, and that was in Germany during that time. So this isn't meant to scare anybody, but that's what can happen if this occurs too much. And then short-term inflation. It's the increase in the total demand or the decrease in the total supply. So the key price increases. So an example of this is the price of oil raises dramatically. Right now we're experiencing some major short-term inflation when it comes to, I know it's gradually happened over the years with oil, but just lately, as I filled up my car just yesterday, and that has gone up I would say 19 cents within the past, a couple weeks, especially with what's happening over in Russia and Crimea and Ukraine, because of course Ukraine has a lot of the gas and oil supply that they run through their country. So anyways, that's kind of the idea behind that. So as we briefly look at an overview at the monetary and fiscal policy, let me kind of redo my... Okay, so here we have these two things. So the fiscal policy, we've got Congress. Congress is the power of the purse. They technically have the money. And so they pass bills, and the president says, yes, I will or will not sign them, but you need the president's signature on the majority unless you have this certain special occasion. But basically, yes, you need the president as well. So it's government spending in times of a recession and depression. That's fiscal policy. And then we've seen that with deals with production instability. They're trying to influence the products that are out there in the market. And so that's the New Deal. Monetary policy. Okay. Now, what's interesting is the Federal Reserve, which was created by Wilford Woodruff, and he created this to control the money supply and not the private banks. They felt like the private banks would get greedy, so they created the Fed. And so what the Fed does is it controls the money supply. And so this does influence inflation because they say, okay, we're going to use more money, we're going to print more. And so that puts more paper money in the market. And so this deals with price instability because it will raise or lower prices. It raises interest rates or, can lower interest rates as well. And so all of this, as we see, the idea is that really the law of supply and demand can correct these weaknesses in time. The real question is, do we have patience to see it through? Do we have patience to allow it to come through? Now remember, the law of supply and demand, it's a natural law. No one made it up. It's a consequence of being on earth and trying to survive and live. So it really is kind of like the law of gravity. Law of supply and demand happens depending on the people. And so do we trust ourselves enough to correct ourselves in time? Appropriate monetary policy in times of inflation. So here are a couple points that the readings raised about this. So raise interest rates. That's one way that they try to help with inflation. Reduce money supply. Now, as you're probably thinking to yourself, don't they lower interest rates and don't they increase the money supply? And yes, they do. That's why I was trying to tell you, when it's in time of inflation, you've got to discipline yourself and say, we need to raise. So on my house, 3.5%, because they lowered it on a 15-year mortgage. Oh, 3.5%, that's amazing. Now you see them slowly rising. But, people, of course, as well, lost out money in that. With the interest rates going down, inflation decreases when they do this, even though people want to spend more and think, oh, this is good. And then they flood the market with money. So really we're seeing that people aren't kind of doing this appropriately. The Fed isn't. It's hard because it would look bad. They would look like the bad guys. And then also too, sell bonds and securities. The problem with this is, They're essentially selling them to themselves. So it's kind of fake. The notion was they used to sell bonds and securities to anyone, other countries, and of course to the American public first. And so less and less is happening because people are not trusting the dollar. So people are not wanting to buy it. All right. So we see here with the New Deal and this, inherent response to the marketplace. We see all the 4 different things that we've kind of talked about. So the cause, people's belief that capitalism failed. There are weaknesses of capitalism, no doubt, but failed is another debate. So they look to government to correct these weaknesses. And then what happens? Here's the effect. The strengthened notion of big government. Yes, it worked. We need big government. It maintained people's faith in American economic system, and people accept the government as an economic regulator. And that's happened ever since the New Deal, really. That FDR really changed everything. He was a politician that changed the face of how we do things. So what can we learn from this information? So here's my closing to you. Government intrusion does mean less freedoms. Again, that's not always bad. We do have to find a balance, especially if we trust the people in charge. But this is what it does mean. Know that every time the government intrudes, we have less freedoms. So, unequal distribution of wealth. What can we learn? Do you feel like you did not get what you deserved? Greed and corruption. Are you being honest in your labor? Are you giving an honest day's work for an honest day's pay? Forget about your employer. Forget about others around you. What are you doing? You can only control yourself. And then production instability and price instability, they both go together. Are you saving for a rainy day? I had to really evaluate this from myself and change. There's lots I have to change. Do you have patience to allow supply and demand to correct itself? Or do you look to government to step in? So really practicing economic virtue will save us. Each one of these talked about economic virtue. When we practice economic virtue, we're not going to have unequal distribution of wealth as bad. There's always going to be that there to some degree. Greed and corruption, we definitely will not have greed and corruption. Production instability and price instability. This might fluctuate here and there, but when we practice economic virtue, it will correct itself quicker. So just know that some of these things are within your control, and it starts with you. How will you decide to be different? Okay, so there is my overview of lesson 07 and 8. Now you can continue on with me. I just want to go over a couple of questions with you because I feel like I need to go over some questions because maybe that might be a little difficult when taking these tests. So I'm going to bring this over here. So I've put up some practice questions. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And I kind of want to talk this through with you. I'm going to even make it larger. Here we go. So some of these questions you might see on the test and some you might not because they take from a bunch of questions. So here we go. Here's one question. Entitlement programs are A, programs designed to foster economic justice, programs designed to protect the people from tyranny, programs designed to encourage self-reliance, programs that have always been a part of American life. So let's eliminate. I can help you eliminate 2. So right here, encourage self-reliance. As we know, entitlement and self-reliance do not coexist. So right now, C is just definitely not it. We know that's not it. D, have always been part of. Well, we know that's not true because entitlement came about with FDR and the New Deal. So it has not always been part of American life. So that's out of it. Programs designed to protect the people from tyranny. Well, this is an interesting one. We know that we can get tyranny from more government involvement. It's government. It's tyranny, as we know, is total control of the government and total order. Well, entitlement programs are controlled by the government. So more entitlement programs that seems counterintuitive. It would not necessarily protect us from tyranny. That doesn't mean we're going into tyranny, but it wouldn't protect us from it. So by elimination, programs designed to foster economic justice is the answer. Now, regardless of how you feel about entitlement programs, they were created to help try to make things more just. And that is really what it was for, economic justice. And that's kind of what we've been talking about in these past lessons. Okay, so here's one, true or false. The Federal Reserve System was created to give the American people more control over the money supply through their representatives in government, rather than have the money supply controlled by private banks who might have their own motives. Now, this definitely feels wrong, because how is it that we have more control? But this answer is true. And it is true because before the Federal Reserve, it was private banks. Private banks controlled everything. So it seemed like, and you had in the hands of the few, the very few wealthy, the very few people, they controlled the whole money supply. So that's when the government stepped in and said, we're not comfortable with that. And they created the Fed. Now the Fed, as you know, the chairman is nominated by the President of the United States. And of course, we elect the president. And then, so the president nominates the Fed chair. That Fed chairman goes before the Senate to get approved. And so we elect the Senate. So that's kind of the way in which we have some say in this, in the Federal Reserve. So that one was for that one. Here's another question. Here we go. In the video clip, IOUSA, the movie, on the state of the economy, what is the greatest? So here we go. Greatest threat to America's future. So not just a threat, but the greatest. And what we look and see, military expenditures. People would say that today, definitely. Terrorist activities. People would think that too. Fiscal irresponsibility or social programs. I know several people who would also think social programs. But really, I'm sure as you probably already guessed, fiscal irresponsibility. That is the greatest threat to America's future. How can really have a future if we can't afford it, right? All right, so here is my last one for you. Okay, here we go. Question. These really trip people up. The accept one and choose not and all this stuff. And this can be difficult. Just know, train yourself not to skim read for this part. So each of the following, except one, represents American industrialization. Now, this next part, you're going, what the heck? I don't know what he said. This next part gives you the clue. Choose the one which is not a negative. Okay. It's not a negative aspect. So already there's going to be three things that are going to be negative or just has nothing to do with American industrialization. So let's look here. A, some industrialists exploited the working people and the consumer. Okay, that's negative, and that's obviously true. So A is not it. Some industrialists used enormous private wealth to buy and manipulate public authority and power. Okay, that's also negative and true. So that's not what we're looking for. Some industrialists sought to create large monopolies through bribery, rebates, and price wars. That's very negative. We do not like monopolies. So already that's not the one we're looking for. So maybe we don't even need to read this. We should, but we kind of know that this one is it. Some industrialists created mass production and modern management techniques, and that is very true. Mass production is what really put us over the top and started putting us on a path to be one of the world economic leaders. So this was a positive thing, even though sometimes the mass production produced negative results with poor working conditions. That's a different story. That's the economic virtue declining. But the mass production in and of itself was good. And that was good for America. Okay, so I hope this helped. Please let me know if you have any questions or you want to go over anything else. I am going to try to do a review in my Adobe Connect session, just like you saw right here. What I've done with this PowerPoint. That's what I want to try to do for the next exam. And I hope this helps you guys with taking this test. And I want you to know that I really want you guys to succeed more than anything. Sometimes it might seem like I might grade harshly on different papers. I just want the best. I want you to learn, and I want you to give a good product. But overall, I want to set you up to succeed. And I really do hope this helped. So good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.